Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, respond. My gosh, are you awake? Good morning,
Morning.
everyone. Thank you. First, I want to thank the music this morning. The Sibelius was my choice. I have always been profoundly moved by the words to that portion of the hymn that is at the end of that symphony. And Julie's choice and Jackie's renditions of all of it was absolutely wonderful. So I thank you. We are so blessed to have this musical team. I also have to tell you, as usual, my hour and 15-minute commute is always very exciting. There's one tricky spot on Telegraph where if you're not paying attention, there's like 4 lanes going in 2 different directions, and you really need to be in the correct lane or you could end up in Timbuktu. Fortunately, I made it to Rochester Hills, so we say thank you, God, for that. The memory of Memorial Day. I knew most of the people, with the possible exception of Julie, remember that this day was once called Decoration Day. Why? Because we went to the cemetery and put flowers on the gravesites. Decoration Day, and I thought, what a strange thing to do, to go to a cemetery and put flowers on a gravesite. Of course, it was as I grew up and I began to understand what we were doing. It was the best that we could do. We took a tribute to the people who had passed away, especially those who had lost their lives in service to the country. The question is, what else could we have done? Well, I think we could have made some different choices, but I'll get into that a little bit later. I'd like for a moment to speak about service to our country. There is a saying in Latin, which I believe I have correctly transcribed. I'm not sure about the Latin, but I know the English. It says, dulce et decorum est, mort pro patria, which is, it is sweet and gracious to die for the country. I'd like us to take a look at that. Of course, service to our country is sweet and gracious. It's our country. We should love it, even on days when it may not be behaving or acting the way we would like it to be, even on days when we are disturbed by its history or its current activities. But to serve our country, there are other ways to do it besides military service. In my old age, I have finally started working on election day. Friends, that is a very long day because the polls open at 7 and we have to be there at 6 a.m. And though they close at 8, we may not leave before 9 or 10. Fortunately for most of us, we are able to be seated, but it is a very, very long day. We do other things. Did you recently get an orange plastic bag in your mailbox delivered by the postman saying that put, what do you call it?
Non-perishable.
Yeah, non-perishable, thank you. Non-perishable something in it, and it will be collected the following week and given to people who may not be as fortunate as you are. That's the implication. I was surprised, and I'm afraid I was judgmental, at a significant number of empty mailboxes in my fairly affluent neighborhood. Folks, you could have put 2 cans of beans in there, really, at least. You could have done something. That was the kind of home I was raised in. If it was a clothing drive or it was a food drive, it was considered, no matter how little you may seem to have, you have more than enough to give, which is why we do the charity giving that we do here in our community. And I remember well, not going to give the date exactly, but it was when people were finally coming out of refugee camps after World War II. And they came to America with nothing. My mother went through the closets and the linen closet, and there she was with one of my favorite sweaters, and I went, "Where are you going with that sweater?" And she said, "You have plenty more. Those people don't have any." And she gave them sheets and towels. And every Christmas and Easter, she made up a box of food and took it to each of those families. That's also how we serve our country. It's also why we don't, thank God, empty ashtrays from our car anymore in parking lots. We have become aware of the necessity of preserving the planet on which our country is located. To serve our country, we need to be willing, and we need to be discerning in that which we do, because we need to protect, and we need to sacrifice as well. But I find it still very sad when life has to be sacrificed. We have consequences from the actions that we take. I'm thinking, I have been a lifelong student of history, so I've done a lot of reading on World War I. And one of the consequences was that two words came into our language: shell shock. It was the result of soldiers who had been traumatized in battle. Shell shock. Unfortunately, in some cases, that was misinterpreted. And sometimes they were executed as malingerers or traitors. That's a part of history that we do not need to repeat. Then I think of World War II. And I remember one time in our parish church, I was standing back there where the wreaths would have been, and I noticed this framed picture, and it had names and military sort of something or other on it, and I went up to it and I read it. And on one half of it were those who had survived, and on the other was those who had not. I was amazed to see that my mother's 4 brothers, thanks be to God, had all survived. 2 had been in the Pacific, 2 had been in the European theater. It was many, many, many years later, in a conversation with my father, that I learned something very significant. Now, there were 4 older girls, then there were 4 boys, then there was a young girl, the last one. Aunt Helen was the baby. When the 4 men went off to military service, each sister took one brother to whom she wrote every single day. And that was when I learned that my mother had been writing to her brother Eugene. Well, that wasn't really his name, that was his middle name. His given name was Marian, M-A-R-Y-A-N, a not uncommon name in Polish and Eastern European families. His last name was Kubiak, and my poor uncle went through 4 years of service in the war with, "Hey Kubiak, how come you got a girl's first name?" That did not protect him from going into France on D-Day +4. And he said, "You know, Mom's brother wrote home to her, 'Sis, I browned my shorts.'" Can you imagine the fear of leaving those landing vessels and making your way through the water up onto the soil? I never forgot that. But by the time I learned that, it was too late for me to go back and speak to my uncle. He was already gone. He was already gone. So we look at the things that we remember on Memorial Day. As I said, They called it shell shock then. It was still shell shock, excuse me, after World War II. And nowadays, with the seemingly endless battles and situations that the world deals with, we still have people who are sacrificing their lives. The ones whom I think who have passed, we know they have gone to be with the God of their understanding, according to their understanding. That is their comfort. But I wish to speak of those who I think of as the living wounded. I recently saw a program on TV in which a teenager talked about his consequences of his father coming home from Afghanistan and Iraq, so profoundly shattered that as a small boy he felt responsible for his dad. I mean, I sat there in absolute tears. And at one point, the teenager said, I began to become really depressed because my dad was so ill. Not physically ill, but emotionally, spiritually ill. And he said, I began to think maybe my family would be better off if I weren't there. He said, so I took one of our dog leashes and I went into my bedroom and I looped it around the upper deck of this bunk bed and I put it around my neck. I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story because the grace of God, his mother walked in and caught him and saved his life. But it struck me so profoundly. We remember today those who have given their lives and are buried. What of those who have given the living essence of whom they are and are the walking wounded? Those are the people whom we need to remember. Those are the people who, when they do outrageous things, when they react in strange ways, when they are violent, when they are distressed, we must understand those are the consequences. Those are the consequences of war. You know, we perceive the enemy in different ways. I read a very interesting book many years ago in which how language defines the enemy for us. I'm not going to use any of the pejorative words because they're disgraceful and they have no real meaning. But when we want to demean someone, we attach a word to it, a name to it. But through the grace of God, one day, I had a powerful experience, friends. I was living in Munich, Germany. My then husband, my late husband, was posted to the American consulate where he was head of the consular section. And I had a neighbor who introduced me to the most wonderful place in the world. It was a huge community center in Munich, not very far from where we lived, that had an Olympic-sized swimming pool, every possible sport kind of hall, and a sauna. A sauna. And we started going to the sauna. We became sauna buddies. Okay, one little secret. You don't wear bathing suits in Europe when you go to the sauna. Okay, you forget that I said that. But nobody cared because everybody looked like everybody else. We all had the same equipment. What did it matter? It didn't. And we would sit there and we would schwitz. We would sweat like crazy, and then we would run out the door and jump into this pool of mountain spring water that was ice cold all year long. But boy, did we have healthy skin, and were we well.
That's what the Finns do.
And I'm thinking of when Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you, take care of one another. You know, you could look at the lady next to you and hand her the loofah and say, would you scrub my back? And she would say, sure. She didn't know who you were, and you didn't know who she was, but she'd scrub your back, and boy, were you clean. There was a sense of community. So one day I was standing there and I was reading the bulletin board, you know, the little 3x5 cards, and they had announcements of this, that, and the other thing. And then I found one that was informing me of the fact that this woman had seemed to have lost a silver acorn pendant that she had worn on a chain, which is understandable. I mean, if you're getting loofah'd and you're drying yourself off, it could have come off. And it wasn't the fact that she'd lost it, it was the way she identified it. It was the last item she had of meine Stalingrad gefallene Bruder, my brother who died at Stalingrad. In case you need a quick history story, that was one of the worst battles of World War II, with horrific losses on both the Russian and the German side. And I thought, in my stupidity, I thought, well, you started it. Too bad you can't find that little thing. I didn't sleep well that night. That was through the grace of God that I was kept awake, tossing and turning and thinking, Linda, who are you if you could be so cold-hearted? And I began to think that young man had been somebody's brother. Maybe he was somebody's fiancé. Maybe he was somebody's husband. He was somebody's son, somebody's nephew, somebody's neighbor. He was a person with a life, with hopes and dreams, and his life was gone in a second. In a second. And for what? And for what? That was when I realized that the grace of God had saved me by enabling me to understand that no matter where you live, what land you live in, what color your skin is, what language you speak, whether your hair is straight or kinky or blonde or black or red or whatever, you are one. There is only one human family because there is only one spiritual family. And God created humankind in God's image and likeness. And through the magnificence of the diversity of creation, we see before us an infinite variety. As I'm always telling you, there is no two sets of fingerprints alike. And yet, we are born, we live, and we die in the same way, regardless of who we are. What is significant to me about this holiday is not the baseball games. And I do remember one time as a child, I grew up in Rochester. We didn't have a major league team, but we had the Rochester Red Wings and a stadium. They were, you know, a feeder team. And I'm guessing the tickets were probably too expensive for the three of us to go to the ballpark. But what you could do was towards the end of the game, if you parked on a side street, you could see the fireworks after the game for free because they came up over the walls of the stadium and you could see them against the sky. And that was what I always remembered, was going to the cemetery in the morning, placing flowers, and then going and watching the fireworks at the end and whatever else we did. So we will do things like that today. We'll go to a ball game, or we'll have friends over, or we'll grill. Driving in this morning, I could tell anybody who could left on Friday those who couldn't left on Saturday, and they won't be back until Monday night or Tuesday morning. I had such a free ride up here. You could have counted the cars on one hand. And that maybe is how it should be, a day of peace and quiet and loving one another. What we can choose to do is to remember to honor one another, so we don't have to go to cemeteries again. So we don't have to see people whose lives have been so rearranged by consequences. In order to do that, we would have to look at the words of Jesus. And what did he say? Love one another as I have loved you. And how did he do that? How did he do that? That's an answer that each one of us has to come up with for ourselves. I can certainly give you examples. He gave charity, obviously. He healed people. I can hear us going, yeah, well, wait a minute, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dentist, I'm not a nurse, yes, and baloney. You are. How many times, how many classes have we taken which has said the power and the presence of God is within you? And then we've sat there silently in meditation and we've got rid of the headache that we had. We know that we can find lost things because one Sunday, as the usher brought up the basket, he said, and could you pray that my kitty returns because he seems to have gone missing. I said, you mean the praying cat? He said, yes. I said, well, we're going to pray right now. And we did. And do you know, late that night after I had gone to bed, I got a phone call that said, when I finally got home at 5 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, he was waiting for me on the porch.
Yay.
And friends, I've had experiences where people have said, can you pray with me? I've got and they describe a situation in their life, sometimes a physical something. And I have. And 2 days later, the person called me and I said, well, how did the doctor's appointment go? And she said, they couldn't find it anymore. They did x-rays and everything, and it's not there now. And what did Jesus say? It is not I, but the Father within who does the work. It is the energy within each of us, and we can choose that energy, friends. You know, when you touch somebody's shoulder, when you give them a hug, when you give them a look, a smile, why not bless them? Please don't run around like a holy roller going, oh, bless you, bless you, bless you. Don't embarrass yourself and anybody in the supermarket aisle, for goodness sakes. Just look at them and go, and then pick out another apple. Friends, the living quality of our faith and our power to be a power in the world is invisible, and therefore we can do it invisibly. Love one another as I have loved you begins within each of us. As I was telling Betsy this morning, last Thursday, I went to a workshop sponsored by an organization called Braver Angels. Braver Angels. It is an organization that brings people together to explore how they can talk to one another while they seem to be in opposite positions. But you know what it started with? A self-assessment. How polarized am I as I am looking out at the world? That was very interesting. I had two nevers, two sometimes, and one, I don't know. But at the end of the 90 minutes, I had a better sense of how to look at someone and say, tell me more. Tell me more, friend, is an ask. It's an invitation. Tell me about yourself, rather than, you don't actually believe that, do you? That cuts somebody off right there. You don't actually believe that, do you? That's the end of the conversation. But tell me more. Because how else are we going to get to love one another sufficiently that we don't have to dig graves anymore and put flowers on? Was this a peace talk? You can think that if it was. Maybe it was. But it is my invitation to celebrate Memorial Day from the depth of our beings. From the depth of our beings. And maybe as we do that, we can enjoy our hot dogs even more, our potato salad even more, our baseball game even more, or just sitting in our house, cuddling our kitty, our cats, our birds, and there's a really cute stuffed toy in the front pew and anybody can pet it on the way out. My dear friends, it has been a gift to be with you this morning and to have this opportunity to invite us to remember that we may go forward in peace and in love. Let's take that thought into meditation. I invite you to close your eyes, to become comfortable, to allow your breath to ease your body into a place of willingness. A place of willingness. And in that place of willingness, I say within myself, open my eyes that I may see infinite wisdom you have for me. The presence of God within us is wisdom, is intelligence, is discernment, is the power to make a different choice that we may experience a different outcome. That we may move ourselves from dissent to agreement, from a sense of loss to a sense of possibility, from a hardened heart to a soft heart that beats slowly, gently, and lovingly as we inwardly look around our universe and see the infinite variety, even within perfect identical twins. There is some difference. So friends, allow an image to come in your mind. It could be a person, could be a place, could be an organization, could be anything. Look at it. What is it saying to you? What is it calling to you? Are you shying away from it and saying no? Or are you going, let me see, show me more? Our mantra is, open my eyes, that I may see infinite wisdom you have for me. Dear God, may the love that is yours within me be an expression of who I am, because that is who I am. Slowly and gently allow your awareness to return to this place, to this room, to these people, and let us sing together as we are led in the Lord's Prayer.